And I got a whole host of comments. You're crazy. He doesn't pitch like Ohtani. There's no way he's getting as much. Well, guess what? He's getting as much.
FT Senior Insider Ken Rosenthal with us. Let's do this first since we're on the topic right now. Ken, did you hear their point about Flaherty maybe being number 2 stuff-wise in their mind to Yamamoto? And why do you think they made this choice?
To give Yamamoto the extra day's rest. So if he pitches game 2, off day, then 3 straight days, then another off day, that's 5 days rest before game 6. That to me would seem the most logical explanation for why they stacked it the way they did. Now, what gets interesting is, do you throw a bullpen game in game 4 in the middle of 3 straight? How do you structure that? How do you throw a bullpen game into this mix? That I don't know, but my guess is with Flaherty and Yamamoto, they want Yamamoto as he has had really the entire season. This is his first season since coming over from Japan. They want him to have that extra day.
Ken, so I won't quote you exactly because I don't remember how you phrased it, but on the Fox broadcast during the last round, you talked about how they maneuvered through the bullpen games in this entire postseason, and I'll say it probably in too radical of a way, but like punted to an extent in some of the games. And some people are like, what the hell? Like, how do you do that in a postseason? So can you help to clarify with more time, obviously, on a show like this, and
Sure.
if you think there'll be any of that going forward?
Well, what we were talking about on the broadcast and what we talked about in both games 2 and 5 was the fact that the Dodgers got down. And once they got down, they didn't chase the lead. They didn't put in their high leverage relievers. They went with lower leverage guys. And that's why I said they essentially conceded. The deficit in both games, I believe, was 4 runs. And they weren't going to chase it at that point. Now, what I said was not disrespectful to the Mets or not meant to be disrespectful to the Mets. It was simply the reality of Dave Roberts' position. He wanted his high leverage relievers available in that series, the NLCS, for games 3, 4, and 5. So he gave them essentially the day off in game 2. And then the same thing happened in game 6 when he had everybody rested because in game 5, he did not chase the lead. So that's why it was an odd look. And I said that on TV. It was in some ways essentially conceding. I think that's not an unreasonable statement because you're not using your best guys. And I remember in game 2, John Smoltz was pretty clear about how this is an odd strategy for a postseason game. You're not trying to win or go all out to win a postseason game. Well, the end, as I said, justified the means because Dave Roberts, by preserving his high leverage relievers, was in position in game 6 to empty the arsenal.
So are we underselling how much better the Dodgers are than what they showed in the Mets series? Based on what you saw and what we saw, are they actually a little bit better? Because now you're talking about a World Series where this, not trying your best if you're down could be managed differently.
I don't know that we're underselling them, Eric, because clearly they are who they are. They're in the World Series. But their pitching staff is something that requires great care and great maneuverability and skill from Dave Roberts to kind of put the pieces together. Now, it's going to be really interesting to see who is active for this round. If Alex Vesia is back, that changes the equation. If Brusdar Graterol is active, that changes the equation. It gives them more options. One of the problems they had in the NLCS was they didn't have Vesia. And Vesia, in game 4 of the division series, when they ran that shutout with their bullpen game, Vesia got the most outs. He got 5 outs in that game. Nobody else did. So clearly he was a guy that they needed. We'll see how this all transpires and who is active for the World Series. But for the Dodgers, the way they're situated, because they don't get necessarily deep starts, they need as many quality bullpen options as possible. And that's why we're all waiting to see who will be active and who will be not.
Ken, we have a lot of fan questions coming in, and many of them very relevant to the conversation right now. So let's start here. This one's kind of nice and simple, and it could be tied into anybody's status in terms of how they're going to attack them, or even obviously, maybe Freddie Freeman's feeling better for this series, but I'll leave it open to you. Matthew says, I got one. Who do you think is the X factor in the World Series? There's been a lot of debate on this show about what X factor means, but I'll let you take that away.
I'll go with Nestor Cortez Jr. And the reason is he's coming off being not on the roster. He's going to be active for this series, it appears. And if he is active, he will be a left-handed option in the bullpen to counter Ohtani. They've got Tim Hill. He's done really well in the playoffs, and since they acquired him as a left-handed reliever, they've got Tommy Kahnle with the changeup that neutralizes left-handed hitters. But the more options you have for Ohtani, the better. So where the Mets didn't really have an answer for Ohtani, and we said that going into the series, we were wondering, well, where's their Tanner Scott? They don't have one. The Yankees don't have one either. There's only one Tanner Scott, but they have multiple guys that they can go to face Ohtani and Freeman, for that matter, in the late innings, and that's why I'll go with Cortez Jr.
I like that. That's a great one. And now we have a follow-up from a really good topic on Fair Territory yesterday, so make sure you check that out. Obviously, it's still super relevant if you want to check it out on YouTube or wherever you get your pods later. So this is from Daniel, Super Chat. Ken, you talked yesterday about the 2016 Cubs. Who else did you think would be a dynasty and it did not work out? And this was related to your conversation about winning windows, right? And how they can close quick.
And the reason I brought this up yesterday on the show was because Mets fans, and understandably so, Mets media, people who watch the games, are looking at the Mets and saying, you know what, this looks like it's only the beginning. It might very well be only the beginning, and a really great start. They've got a great management team in place now. My word of caution was the 2016 Cubs. When they won the World Series, they had all these young players, and we thought they'd be great for years, but baseball does not always proceed the way we think it's going to proceed, right? And that's where the difficulty comes in. Now, the question, I can't recall off the top of my head who I thought would be a dynasty and didn't turn out to be. The 16 Cubs stand out the most to me, but I'm sure there were other teams over the years that I felt would be really good and didn't pan out along those lines. I guess you could say the same thing somewhat about the 2015 Royals. They were good, and actually really good, and 14 and 15 made the World Series, but didn't really sustain it. Obviously, as a small market team, that was part of it. So it's a great question, but off the top of my head, I don't have a great answer.
No, all good. Hey, I'll take you back to the series from a media perspective, as of course you'll be a big part of this with Fox and The Athletic and checking in with us, of course, here on FT. Do you think this is going to be the most media coverage in person that you've ever seen for a World Series? Of course, you have the Japanese media, which already brings a huge presence throughout the entire regular season. They've got Ohtani, they've got Yamamoto, both in this series, and just New York versus LA. Like, I'm picturing Media Day being a lot more wild than last year's Arizona-Texas matchup.
I would agree with that, Scott, and certainly the Japanese media adds big numbers. But times have changed. And newspapers, back when I started in the late 80s and the 90s, they would send writers to the World Series regardless of whether their team was in it. So for the Baltimore Sun, where I worked from 87 to 2000, I covered the World Series every year. Now that is very rare when you see newspapers travel to the World Series that are not covering teams that are involved, right? So outside of LA and New York, we'll have a few different newspapers will cover the World Series, but that's where the great reduction has taken place over the years. So in terms of most media coverage, I don't know if the Japanese numbers replace all the numbers that were lost with newspapers, but it'll be heavier than usual, but I don't know that it's going to be what it was, I don't know, late 90s, 2000s even.
There's some stars that are emerging from here. I mean, you think of Tommy Edman, you think of Tommy Kahnle, all of a sudden taking off with that changeup. But, the one that usually comes to your mind is Juan Soto. He's absolutely dominant. He's a guy you don't want to pitch to. He does the shuffle, this and that. His cost is definitely going up. I mean, what do you think in perspective? I know we're looking ahead to the future, but what is the future of Juan Soto after this?
I don't know, Todd, exactly. Of course, it's an open market. Bidding will ensue, and who knows where the number goes. But I do remember at one point writing, I don't know, maybe after Ohtani, some point after that Soto was going to be 500 million. And I got a whole host of comments. You're crazy. He doesn't pitch like Ohtani. There's no way he's getting as much. Well, guess what? He's getting as much. And what he's going to do, in my opinion, the one thing I feel relatively comfortable saying is he will try to beat Ohtani's present day value in annual salary. So if you remember, Ohtani, because of the deferrals, yes, it's $70 million a year, but once you defer it, it comes to, depending on the calculation, 45, 46, 47, whatever it is. I would imagine Soto's AAV is going to start with a 5. Then it becomes a question of how many years, and we'll see where that goes.
I'm going to take a turn here for the last few minutes with Ken. So Fernando Valenzuela was lost yesterday, just 63 years old, legend in his own right in our sport. So a couple fan questions, actually, just wanting some insight from you. So we'll start with Graham, who said, do you have any good stories that you remember from watching him or hearing about him, after the fact? Because your coverage within the game started what year?
87. So
Okay.
kind of after Fernando Mania. But certainly I was growing up at the time and I was a fan of the game. And I remember that first year when he was 20 years old in 1981, those first 8 starts, 7 complete games, 5 shutouts, a 0.50 ERA. Think about that. Those first 8 starts. Now, we're talking about a pitcher who burst onto the scene in the manner of Paul Skeens. It was not unlike that in terms of quality of performance. The difference is, with Fernando, there was this whole other cultural aspect because he was this Mexican pitcher in Los Angeles and just attracted those fans in a way that really no player had before. And I'm going to read you guys a quote from Vin Scully that was in the LA Times years ago. And this will capture it better than I could. Vin said, Fernando Mania bordered on a religious experience. Fernando being Mexican, coming from nowhere, it was as though Mexicans grabbed onto him with both hands to ride to the moon. And it wasn't just Mexicans. It was a lot of Latin American fans from other countries as well. He was very unique. First of all, he had that incredible delivery where his eyes rolled up into his head. He threw screwballs, which was a unique thing. And he had this, I don't know if I'd call it magnetism, but there was a certain charisma to Fernando. And Fernando Mania was a big thing. And that's, again, the best way I could describe it. Skeens with a cultural aspect added in. And you can imagine how big that was. Here's a guy pitching in Los Angeles, the only pitcher to win Rookie of the Year and Cy Young in the same year. He did it in 81. And one other note about 81, World Series. Remember, the Dodgers had lost to the Yankees in 77 and 78. In 81, they're down 2-0. Fernando is pitching game 3. They take a 3-0 lead, and then he gives up 4. And in that game, he pitched a complete game, a 147-pitch complete game. The Dodgers won. They rallied to win the series. And again, he was a huge part of that.
So, Ken, we got one last fan question here. This is for Pavlady19. Scott, it should have said Todd.
Yeah.
Can you ask Ken about Fernando's chances of getting to the Hall of Fame, not for stats, but for his impact on baseball? You kind of hit on it a little bit, his impact, but, what do you think his chances are?
Well, let me check this a little bit before we go any further. Bear with me, because I think he already did not make it. Let me just make sure I'm on that.
What he did in baseball was incredible, especially his first year and where he came from and all different types of stats that he had.
Yeah,
and he made the Dodgers ball.
He was off the ballot after 2 years. It just didn't last long enough. But the question raises a good point. Here's a guy who had this incredible impact. Now, it wasn't classic Hall of Fame impact, and I don't know that he'll ever get in because it just didn't last long enough, the career, the excellence. But guys like that, there's a special place for them in our memories, and I'm sure he's represented in Cooperstown in some fashion. People often forget that even if you're not in Cooperstown as an inductee, you might be represented in some other way. Heck, Todd Frazier might be in Cooperstown for all I know in some fashion. So I would think that there's something about him in there. Maybe they'll put a little exhibit in there now. I don't know exactly, but he was only on the ballot 2 years and then fell off. Didn't get enough votes.
All right, last and final question from us, and then we'll let you go. We have Ken Goldin coming on, king of collectibles. He's the guy that sold the 50-50 ball for over $4 million. I have 2 questions. Do you have anything that he can use from you that might sell for that much? Like a playbook or a pen or a bow tie?
There's nothing that is in my possession that is worth 1/50th of that much.
All right.
1/1000th that much.
He's probably listening now. If you had a question for a guy like Ken Goldin who sells all this stuff, what would it be? What do you think? Would you have anything to ask him?
I guess my question would be, what makes the collectibles market go up and down? Because remember, there are some times where people will say, oh man, collectibles are down right now. And then, oh my gosh, they're sky high again. So without knowing much about collectibles, actually knowing nothing about them, that would be my one question.
Perfect.
All
Done.
right.
We're going to ask him, right?
I'm writing it down.
Todd's writing it down, so it's real. When he writes it down, pen to paper, it's happening. So, Ken, awesome stuff. Thank you so much for joining us as always, and we will talk to you when you're in LA, right, coming up for the World Series.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. That's Ken Rosenthal. The Inside Scoop is powered by MLB Rivals. Go check out MLB Rivals wherever you can give it a little download on your phone. It's free. Scan the QR code on your screen if you want to go right to it from your phone. Ranked battle renewal, new rival series grade, special cards, new trade event minigame. It's an awesome game to play. And again, it's free. So take a little sneak peek. Then we're going to talk to Ken Goldin about that Shohei Ohtani ball.
In the heart of every baseball season, there exists a rivalry that transcends the game itself. We gather for the love of the game. We watch as history is made. And we play for our city. Download MLB Rivals 24.
Hey everybody, be sure to like and subscribe for more content.
We're back here every weekday, all year long, so do not miss an episode.
The videos are coming in all day. Here's another video you might enjoy.
Baseball the way it should be covered.